actually in this room.
But yeah, it's all newer now. They're coming into Sherwood, they're closing here and there, doing all that. It's not a big deal.
It's 6 o'clock. Call the downtown steering committee meeting for tonight.
We've all got those internet watches.
I'm 60 this year.
4 minutes.
2
minutes.
She's the producer.
30 seconds.
Oh, cool colors. Cool.
Is that gas over there?
That's John.
It's on the
No, he's advisory. Parking advisory.
I got
John McClellan.
Yeah, okay. I can't take my chance.
I did just chance. That's right, we're short next video. Just got some human capital. No. We got to keep it.
I think I got my mother's.
Call the steering committee meeting for downtown to order for October the 6th. Call the roll. Dave, when you did that.
Roll call. Nate Bowman.
He's
Here.
Gatewood Campbell.
here.
Doug Ferguson.
Here.
John Flynn.
Here.
John Foster.
Here.
Barbara Gerhart.
Here.
Charles Grignard.
Here.
Lee Hallman.
Here.
Janelle Harris.
Here.
Elaine Kearns.
Here.
Bob Lemon. Sarah McCauley.
So here.
Elizabeth Rodriguez.
Here.
Cindy Trevison.
Here.
Jessica Tucker.
Here.
For non-voting members, April Dunn.
You can, I believe we just have to, we raise your hand, Kathy and
John.
John.
Okay.
That's all. Anybody else? Thank you. Appreciate it. Our agenda tonight is to, as you know, do we have any public speakers? Wait a minute. Excuse me. I'll get that. Back. We have the minutes for September the 29th. Okay. Approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second. Get us out of here. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, none.
I'll make a motion we approve the minutes as presented for September 29th.
Thank you.
Second.
Second. John. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Chairman's remarks. I thank everybody for being here and attending. Next item is public comments. Do we have any public speakers? No. We do not. Thank you. This number item is 7, is a general update and overview. And as Terry Shook and Larry make their presentations, I would ask you to hold your questions until they get through the presentation, and then we'll go back and try to answer every question, and they can bring back up the slides that you're referring to. Okay? So,
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steering Committee, it's a pleasure to be back in front of you this evening here since our last meeting back in June. And just wanted to give a quick update since our re-engagement beginning of September. Some of the things that I've learned through that process was the new town hall location per option 4 that was being considered for this building as well as the adjacent site. So what we've done is we updated the composite plan and let that be some of the inspiration for some of our planning moving forward, particularly in that quadrant. So what we're going to share tonight is sort of a first expression of a draft master plan that's based upon this composite plan. Now, this is an expression of a plan. There's multiple expressions, certainly, but it begins to give us some sense of how this composite plan could manifest into a master plan, and that master plan begins to reinforce and reinform the composite plan as well. For this study, what we're looking at is really that quarter-mile radius of your downtown core, and we define that, of course, the intersection of Gilead Road, Old Statesville Road, but we also look at the intersection of Main Street and Huntersville Concord Road. So that really defines our quarter-mile radius of focus. And as we zoom in on that, we begin to highlight and understand some of the key components of that conceptual framework plan as we look at the master plan. And we let this begin to help us understand how we might describe and share with you some of the key considerations, looking at each of the quadrants of the downtown. And just for ease of boundary, we're looking at a northwest quadrant, northeast quadrant, southwest, and southeast quadrant. And what we'll share here, this is one plan expression. It'll be followed by another plan expression. But they're really more or less the same plan with a couple of nuances on some key catalytic blocks. And just to give you some background on what you're looking at now, this is sort of that first expression of a master plan. And again, it's a draft in progress. Some of the graphics are not highly resolved, but begins to give you some insight in terms of our planning process. Just to give you an idea of some of the colorizations on here, the white building footprints, or sort of building envelopes, we should call them, those are what is being proposed as part of this draft master plan. The colorized buildings or footprints represent either existing buildings or buildings that have been approved through various projects that have gone through the process over the past several months. You see certain roads highlighted or picked out in that darker brown color. And again, that's sort of a planning tool for us to understand the network of streets. Some of the streets do not have them, and again, that's part of our planning process as we showcase and highlight existing streets and then want to emphasize other streets just from a planning purpose. We can talk about that later as we get into this. You see obviously in the green representative of some of the key open spaces and how they tie into existing and proposed open spaces. And off to the right, you see what we're calling the potential key catalytic projects. And again, this is kind of an overview as we look at some of the opportunities within the downtown, each of these quadrants. And we haven't put them into any sort of ranking yet or hierarchy, but we just want to call them out almost like a stream of thought as we go through this. And we've organized them into sort of economic development projects, which could be public, as they're either controlled by the town, or private, as they might be controlled by individual property owners. We're looking at infrastructure projects as well, whether they're transportation, encompassing all modes of transportation, and open space. And we ask you, as we go through this series of slides this evening, please keep these in mind. Think about if they are correct or if they need to be augmented, or if there's others that come to mind as we go through this process.
It's a sad face.
I'm sorry?
Let's see if it works. If not, we need to drive.
Great, thank you very much. So here we're hovering on a large area of the Northwest Quadrant. And just from a boundary standpoint, we're looking at that being defined by Gilead Road to the south, and to the east would be Main Street. So this area here, just from a planning standpoint, helps us understand and hover over a focus on the Northwest Quadrant. Now, as we look at some of these initial considerations, some of these key blocks, of course, number one we look at is the new town hall and some of the opportunities with the position of that building and the parking that's associated with that. Now, as part of that option 4 plan, long-term, there's the idea for perhaps some structured parking. So as we look at that from a planning standpoint, there's certainly a number of things that you can do to configure that parking structure or think about the site around it that allows for future development to activate and animate some of the existing potential new spaces around your downtown core. And this position in here is quite unique, in fact, that it allows you perhaps to create this public square that was part of the composite plan there along Huntersville-Concord Road. And you can see, as we look at these parking decks, our approach really is to find ways to take advantage of shared parking opportunities, as well as providing some additional development around that to really energize some of the activity around that area, particularly framing up that central park there. Now, some of the interesting conditions there, obviously, is the Mamma Mia 2 building that sits in that space. And as we go through this process, curious, and we'll have ongoing discussions about how that could be incorporated within that public space. We see that as a wonderful opportunity to create this downtown central park and really embrace some of the existing tree canopies in there and frame it with active ground floor uses. Some other key components of this quadrant here are certainly the CMS. And as we've shared early on in other conversations, CMS is very much open to a more urban elementary school prototype. So what you see here is an evolution of those discussions where we're looking at a more compact building and site, which looks at organizing some of the student drop activities on site to alleviate any burdens on existing roads, Sherwood Drive and certainly Gilead Road. And there's opportunities to integrate a shared gymnasium that would be part of the Parks and Rec. And hearing from you during our last conversation, is there an opportunity to keep and salvage some of the existing structure, or they can look at including it within the building itself? But that is certainly a key component within this Northwest Quadrant, along with some of the other redevelopment opportunities that might be part of a P3 approach with CMS. You can see also, we're looking at Holbert Park and opportunities to expand that Greenway system. We heard over the last couple of steering committee meetings from the Parks and Rec Department, there is already a plan in place to look at perhaps growing the park incrementally as might be possible with some of the adjacent landowners through either acquisition or strategic partnerships for conservation easements or things of that nature. So we really embrace that as a key central park and great, fantastic amenity in your downtown core, and just trying to find ways to tap into that and draw those components into the town to increase that connectivity and walkability. The other thing that's great about this park, that's the opportunity to introduce perhaps a stormwater strategy that's more regional in its character, that can be amenitized and become a feature within your downtown. A great showcase piece to demonstrate some of the forward thinking right there in front of the new town hall. Some of the other key components, obviously, is the east-west connector street that's been part of the discussions over the past several planning iterations. And what we're trying to do is find that alignment just to preserve that in terms of its planning and opportunities. Again, the logical location for us is an alignment with 2nd Street. If by chance there is the opportunity to cross the Norfolk Southern Corridor, it seems to make sense to have that alignment. So with that in play, as we look at some of the planning considerations, we look at, okay, where's that street position relative to Huntersville-Concord Road? And where are there other opportunities for connections between Old Statesville Road and Main Street. And you can see that new street that we've got highlighted there, where number 4 is. That is one location that we are considering. And some of the aspects of that are that it allows us to front that street on both sides with either existing developments in place or new development that evolves over time. And you can see it's offset from that parking structure there with the town hall. So that gives some development flexibility so you can take advantage of perhaps some shared use, but also to mask and disguise that deck so it's not exposed to the general downtown in your streetscape. That red line that you see on 2B, that represents another alignment. That was part of an earlier plan from the 2040 plan. And again, this is part of an evolution of the process. But we wanted to show that alignment just so you can see its relationship to the new planned town hall and what that might mean in terms of perhaps foreclosing an opportunity for development of a deck edge. Now, so there's some complexities with either of these two schemes. The new street that's proposed right there, if it extends all the way to Main Street, you can see it sort of tracks through, or does track through the American Legion building. We see that American Legion building as a wonderful opportunity to perhaps reach out and collaborate if they are willing to get a new facility that might shift to the south. You can see it's represented on this plan here, and perhaps co-locate with another civic activity to really anchor and engage the Veterans Park. Let them be part of Veterans Park instead of sort of separated with the sea of parking. But again, that red line represents an alignment that goes by their front door, which might be more appealing to them, given that it does not require a relook at their building. It's not to say that it couldn't be an offset situation where you have that new street and it stops at Maxwell Avenue and you have another street that jogs over. Oh, the intent is we're trying to really increase connectivity in street networks within your downtown core to begin to alleviate some of the pressures on these existing intersections. Now, to the north of that new street, you see a couple of block configurations identified by 16. What we're trying to show is a block structure that is very flexible to accommodate a number of different building types. Your detached, and perhaps apartment building types within those blocks there. So these are represented as sort of realistic footprints that can work. We're looking at a network of alleys that begin to serve those buildings. And you can see with that block that faces Old Statesville Road, what we want to do is look at that as an opportunity perhaps for a more incremental approach. Again, this wouldn't necessarily all happen at one time. This is something that would happen based upon ownership patterns. But the one thing that we do see is important with Old Statesville Road is that you preserve that street canopy as you come into your downtown. That is a wonderful street canopy. It really sets, in our minds, sort of the soul, the green approach that is being represented with some of the projects you have going on right now with your Holbrook Park. So in any redevelopment scenario, we would certainly want to respect those setbacks that are established by those existing buildings to preserve that tree canopy and provide some additional pedestrian walkability. You can see in number 17 there, we're showing perhaps the ability for some small infill housing of some sort, or that could be a larger civic parking facility to take advantage of an expanded Holbrook Park. That would give you an opportunity to access the park parking without going through the intersection of Old Statesville Road and Gilead Road. You can access directly from Old Statesville Road and enjoy the park. Again, the nuance with this plan here, if I toggle back and forth once or twice, you can see with the town hall block, what we're doing is we're looking at perhaps a rotation of that parking structure and pushing that building closer, or that development closer to Huntersville Concord Road to make a little bit more narrow park space. Now, some of the thoughts behind that are to give you more flexibility with that development, if that's something that is appropriate along Huntersville Concord Road. And it gives you some relief, if you will, from the parking structure and the new town hall building. The current location of that parking structure, you can see, is right up against the back of the building. And that presents some challenges for programming that building in the future. Obviously, they're going to want to have windows along all those four sides. If you have a 4-story parking deck next to that, it begins to dictate some of the things you might be doing internally. So again, notwithstanding the property overlap. We want to take a look at, okay, if you did rotate a deck, how much flexibility would that give you? And what could that do to give you a more linear green square there, and perhaps bring that retail closer, if that is a commercial ground floor, to a Huntersville Concord Road. Gives you more flexibility as well along Maxwell Avenue. You can begin to look at some deeper building footprints and perhaps, again, get some development that is animating and fronting along Veterans Park. You can see to the north on the Block 16, we're showing some perhaps larger, again, not overly large, but more apartment building type building footprints to give you a sense of how those might scale and fit on that block. Again, with this particular 16 block, we see that as a wonderful opportunity for a very integrated residential block that can take advantage of some of the existing landscape features, trees, and existing buildings in place there. One side can have a unique frontage along Maxwell. The other one has its unique frontage along Old Statesville Road. As we look at some of the considerations for that parking deck, in the upper right-hand side there, you can see the draft master plan, and to the left, you see the new town hall option 4. And you can see what was intended with, and again, we understand it's an initial design, early in concept, but this is what that represents. If they were to do a 4-story parking deck along Maxwell Avenue, you can see what we're hinting at right now with Maxwell. We see that as an opportunity for it to convert into an extension of the Boone Earth from the south. We'll talk about that in a moment. But you can see it's really an attitude about providing an urban stormwater approach with that street, looking at bioswales integrated with some on-street parking, pervious pavers, and then with this parking structure, the opportunity to do some creative landscaping with some planters. But you can see what it does in terms of this frontage along the grass lawn of Veterans Park. It doesn't really provide any animation or activity. Of course, you can do some creative things with a parking deck. You can have events on the top level. You can do some film projections if you did a screen on one side. But we wanted to share with you what that might mean from a planning perspective. As we look at some perhaps other alternatives, one thought is, can you program that ground level of the parking deck? Erode the ground floor, park on top of that, but slip in some commercial activity on that ground floor to animate that street activity and get some of that spilled out onto Veterans Park. Taking it a step further, can you set that deck back all the way, a full 36 feet plus or minus, to get a urban workplace building or shop front building that has some residential or some office space above that has some overlooks onto the grass lawn there. Now, you're going to see a number of these cross-section vignettes here as we go through this, and I just want to point something out. You see that this is a cross-section, you see a cutaway into the space that's beyond there, commercial, residential, residential. You can see some balconies above. You can see some blank walls on this side over here. That is not intended to be a blank wall. What we're trying to do is just show an extension of that facade. We didn't want to generate a continuation of that sort of expression right there. So it's a sort of a simplified way for us, demonstrate some of the street enclosure that happens when you have a wall of development. Now, some of the things that we're maintaining uniform with each one of these opportunities is certainly the width of the sidewalk, which if we look at the existing configurations, you can probably get about 14 feet plus or minus along that edge. And one of the great things about these Vooners is that there's sort of this blurring or overlap that takes place, and you'll see this consistent throughout some of these other vignettes here, where there's the opportunity to reclaim some of these on-street parking spaces with movable bollards to expand that outdoor dining. If this commercial space was a restaurant per se and you needed more outdoor seating, you could reclaim some of this area. These are just some vignettes if we're standing in the park looking back at that 4-story parking structure, what it might look like if you're in that space. This next one here is if you program that ground floor, what that might look like. And again, this is if you were to do a liner building along that parking structure. Move into the Northeast Quadrant. This is an exciting area for us from a planning standpoint. It's really a wonderful opportunity to create this wonderful new sort of integrated urban neighborhood right in your downtown area there. We know right now as it exists, there's sort of a scattering of many single-family homes. We do know that there's certainly developments happening on this other side of Huntersville Concord Road that's actually jumped the street and on the corner there, 2nd Street. But as we look at this, we know and we really appreciate the tree canopy that exists in this area. It's one of the unique things that your town has in close proximity to your downtown core, within your quarter-mile downtown core. So with that in mind and understanding some of the capital improvement projects that are being talked about for this area, particularly Walter Street, we see Walter Street as an opportunity to embrace as a green street. There's a number of wonderful trees along that frontage there, and we just see that as a great way to embrace and integrate any sort of improvement project to create a true north-south green street that connects with the open space that's up to the north here and the space to the south. We'll talk about that in a moment. What you'll see here also is an approach to what is being discussed as sort of a straightening out of Huntersville Concord Road. We know that there's that elbow that exists right now, and I know right now it's just more of a conversation, perhaps a line on a piece of paper, but we wanted to offer some suggestions about how you might approach that. And what you see here in 1A is a way to perhaps embrace, we know that there's a number of large specimen trees in that corner there. Can we preserve those and create a very interesting yet functional sort of enlarged, elongated roundabout which preserves those trees, creates this amazing gateway into your downtown, and provides this great neighborhood space at the same time. With 1B, we're showing another alternative, and perhaps these could be looked at together or individually. We know with Walter Street and its enhancements and its connection to the South Church Street extension, that is going to be a key intersection. And how should that be handled? What is the best mechanism to allow for that to happen? Is it a signalized intersection? Is it a four-way stop? Is it a one-way stop? Is it a roundabout? These are going to be some of the key things that will be considered with the engineering groups for sure. But we wanted to demonstrate, again, an approach that we think works well and perhaps preserves some trees and gives you a very unique experience that is indicative of some of the patterns that we see here in Huntersville. We'll talk a little bit more about the circulation here when we talk about these other quadrants. But another thing I want to point out, within each, we see these primarily 4 blocks here within that quarter mile, these 2 on the fringe here. As much as possible, we're trying to share thoughts about a connected system of alleys and additional VUNERs. And here is an opportunity for a very walkable neighborhood, because as we know, with along with primary streets, there's a hierarchy of other streets that take place. It could be the VUNERs, the shared space, or it could be alley spaces. But to show that interconnectivity within these larger blocks, in addition to allowing for a variety of different housing projects or types within each of these blocks, they can happen incrementally in a manner that preserves as much of the tree canopy as possible in a very sensitive manner. That also follows some of the property and ownership property patterns. So again, when you look at this, I know it's hard because you're seeing it all at once. Obviously, the intent is that it wouldn't be all happening at the same time, but we're trying to show how an incremental pattern might evolve into a full build-out here. For instance, in this block here, it may not be some of these longer pieces. It might be some smaller infill homes. What we're trying to show is a flexible block pattern that allows for multiple building types. This block here we see is very key for your downtown for a number of reasons, and is perhaps an opportunity to have a little bit more density as you build up into your downtown. It's a larger block, but it's still an opportunity to treat it as a very transitional block where you can preserve the scale and approach along this edge on Walter Street to build up to perhaps something that is more indicative of your downtown. You can see we're showing a parking structure here. We're not saying that that happens out of the gate. It could be, again, this block is large enough where you do something very incremental. It could be, perhaps 3 buildings that happen with surface parking. And then this building, perhaps, if that, plays out, that it's, a smaller scale building, perhaps you don't need that additional parking structure. But if you need, or if there's a desire to have a more dense project, perhaps with some more commercial activity, you have the ability to lay in a parking deck that works very well functionally. You see we're sharing a parallel route with Huntersville Concord Road with this V-nerve here. And that is one thought in terms of how you might handle traffic if this becomes a key corner here with some commercial on the ground floor. To take some of the heat and pressure off the intersection here, that's some of the challenge there with the Main Street project and the crossing of the railroad corridor. Can you have perhaps a one-way street that allows you to filter off and come on to North Church Street and then access the interior of this block? In doing so, you have the opportunity to create this very nice park that showcases the old historic jailhouse building. Perhaps there's another, folly in that space, a shelter, picnic shelter, or it could be a retail kiosk, or it could be something that is an art piece within that space. But the idea is that, again, you have these connected system of greenways that begin to track through your downtown core. This nuance on this plan here just shows a larger footprint on the corner. I know there's been a lot of discussion. Is there an opportunity for a small market within the downtown? So we're trying to show a footprint that might accommodate, a building or a small market that has a 20,000 square foot footprint, somewhere in that range. Again, we're just trying to show the flexibility inherent with that particular block and thoughts about how that might evolve into something that is functional and feasible. You can see in doing so, we eliminate that V-nerve, but perhaps we still have this other north-south one that allows for access into that block and still preserves and showcases the jailhouse as this smaller engaged park along Huntersville Concord Road. As we look at the Walter Street as a Green Street sort of expression, what you see here is that existing, it's about an 18 to 20 foot wide roadway as it exists right now. If you go down that street and look at some of the existing trees there, they're offset maybe 10 feet or so from that existing street. Some of our fears when these roadway improvement projects happen is they sort of clear the trees out and widen the road. Can there be an approach for Walter Street where those trees are preserved? And what you do is lace in this, again, almost V-nerve approach where you can see some on-street parking opportunities and then enhanced medians, 20 feet plus or minus, that incorporates, stormwater bioswales with appropriate landscaping, but then preserves these large mature trees at those various locations along that frontage there to create this very green space. Then you have the opportunity for the front lawns to then front on that with your various building types. In this particular scenario here, we're showing the detached and attached homes. You can also look at certain instances for apartment buildings. And again, as we talked about before, we don't necessarily see these long extruded apartment buildings. There's different apartment building types. It could be a quadruplex, it could be a sixplex or an eightplex, but something that's very incremental in keeping with the scale of the existing neighborhood and transition into other housing. And here's just another view looking at that two-story detached or attached housing and what that space might look like. Again, we know that these are long blocks. Is there an opportunity to integrate some of these pocket parks to become sort of natural places to congregate? It creates friction on the street to slow down traffic and creates those opportunities for safe and easy pedestrian crossing. Now, with a lot of this, you can see we have these extended pathways. We would encourage and invite the development as it advances to preserve these corridors as perhaps public easements to allow for access to these interior blocks, because as we were showing in the plan, those are wonderful environments by themselves that connect to Wooners and other tree protection areas. So you have this sort of, again, hierarchy of pedestrian networks through your neighborhood along the street, and then perpendicular to that to the rear. And here again, this is another expression. This is what the 3-story apartment building, what that vignette might look like. As we go to the Southwest Quadrant, this is a very exciting quadrant for a number of reasons. Certainly, the town hall parcel is a key parcel, and we're showing an approach to a building footprint that takes advantage of that parcel, but yet leaves some green space adjacent to the plaza space there. We do see the opportunity there to set that back to allow for town center building to have that facade presence and perhaps frame that plaza park space. We see that number 1 building as a wonderful opportunity to introduce and enliven retail experience along Statesville Road. You can see we're showing an opportunity if the fire station is relocated. Can you have another civic use that takes its place? Perhaps a public library or a performing arts center, or perhaps it's an extension of whatever program that would happen with the building on the other side. You can see we're showing, it's hard to tell on the screen there, this is about a 600-foot long block, and right now there's no logical pedestrian crossing. We would encourage to work with DOT to have a mid-block pedestrian crossing there. And it could be a signalized crossing, but the thought would be to have that alignment pretty much close to where you have that existing driveway right now. And continue that with a perhaps a smaller access street or VUNER that allows for that connectivity. We look at the block here, we're calling this, just for lack of a better word right now, sort of the Main Street commercial block. We see this, again, as a wonderful opportunity to showcase a lot of the existing historic features and buildings and activities in your downtown. This is part of your soul of your downtown. And we look at this, again, this is sort of a build-out scenario, but as an incremental approach, some catalytic things that might happen is, initially looking at that parking area in the middle of the block there as a surface parked area, perhaps reorganized to make it a bit more efficient and accommodating for all users in this block. I know right now it's somewhat disconnected and perhaps serving 1 or 2 specific uses, but initially can that be sort of reorganized and made a bit more efficient? Building upon that, is there the ability to work with the town and perhaps other property owners in a P3 project scenario where you can look at a structured parking facility in the middle of the block, which would allow for some additional development to happen around the block? For instance, the surface parking that right now is on the town lot, perhaps that could be folded in the parking deck. And by doing so, it allows for development to happen along your main street, become a logical extension of your main street, as well as the activities happening along Maxwell Avenue. With this particular configuration here, we're trying to show it as close to this cross VUNERF here. And again, we see this as another opportunity for connectivity, small scale, small pace, but from Main Street to Old Statesville Road, but then allowing for some development to wrap around the edges there to continue the activity that's happening in that Maxwell Avenue VUNERF. And here we're holding it set back. Perhaps there is an opportunity for a pedestrian pathway that runs along that edge there and provides access to the neighborhood cafe. Is there an opportunity for a half block sort of commercial building there? Again, this is all looking at increasing pedestrian activity on this key corner and frontage along Huntersville Concord Road. Number 7, we're showing right now, just again as a diagram, a larger building there. It's not to say that, because we understand that there's several property owners on that configuration. That could be, if there was a collaboration there, certainly a single building, or it could be 2, 3 buildings that come together in a more incremental approach. But the idea is that, perhaps those buildings don't even happen. But it is served and functions off of this central parking facility, which is benefiting the entire block. You can see we're showing some potential incremental commercial mixed-use infill. Again, happens over time. We're not saying it would happen, but if it does happen, we're trying to establish some of the rules and opportunities for its position along Statesville Avenue, as well as perhaps we're showing this as a potential alleyway to introduce the notion of accessory dwelling units, ADUs, where they could be, perhaps small, living units over garages, or perhaps even a small-scale retail, adding to that sort of eclectic level of retail, sort of on the A Street, B Street approach. So again, this is sort of a first expression of how that block might evolve over time, preserving as many as the key historic features and environmental features that are so much part of that particular area. A couple of fringe areas of that quarter-mile radius. Again, we wanted to show an expression of how you might handle, again, some more missing middle infill development that extends the pattern of housing. You see a couple of yellow small homes there, and the pattern is there. Is there the opportunity to come in there and continue that pattern, introduce some small alley spaces to provide access? And then this block over here with the church structure, which is vacant, there's a large portion of land that's associated with that. Is there an opportunity to turn that into a catalytic project? Perhaps that's renovated into a community facility with some housing that's associated with that creates a small park. The nuance on this one here, the previous one, we were preserving the neighborhood cafe. If over time, that is not preserved, is there some more flexibility in terms of positioning that parking structure to give you more, perhaps future development around its edges, perhaps give you some more flexibility on other development corners. You can see in this one as well, the previous one we were keeping existing cultural center. Here there might be an opportunity for, again, another P3 project where that is a civic, performing arts cultural center as a new facility that's associated with that parking structure. And can that be something that, catalyzes some additional development in this block? Just going through some vignettes here. This is Old Statesville Road. We want to show the existing condition here. So to the left, obviously, is the grass area. And then working to the right, you see the existing sidewalk. This is in place right now. You see the cadence of trees and lights. It's about a 14-foot wide sidewalk there. Old Statesville Road is about 39 feet. You can see the traffic, one way going to the south, and then 2 lanes, the turn lane, and then the through lane to the right. That sidewalk, as it exists right now, is only about 8 to 10 feet wide. As you all know, there's some interruptions along that sidewalk as well. There's some landscaping and some other signs and other things. So it's not a clear 8-foot sidewalk by any means. You see the scale of the existing retail there. It's 1-story commercial, about 20 feet high, and modest storefronts along that edge. So the first thing we want to do is, okay, what if there was the redevelopment of the town hall parcel into a shop front or an urban workplace building, and it was right on that 14-foot existing sidewalk. What does that begin to do in terms of creating that streetscape and that space on Old Statesville Road? Some of the enhancements we would certainly want to look at in this scenario is what can be done to make that feel a bit more safe. Is it the introduction of some bollards on both sides of the street, some rhythms of street lights to give you that sort of implied buffer between the face of the building and the sidewalk? You can see the introduction of sharrows, in the zone here to augment the streetscape and give some primacy, or at least some consideration to the bicyclists who are coming to this intersection here. So as we look at this, it's like, well, is that 14 feet enough? Is that really going to give you the sidewalk program that you want to see along Old Statesville Road in your downtown core? Can we look at increasing that width to 20 feet, from a building face standpoint, to allow for some outdoor activities, whether it's dining or some other convening areas? Along with that, you could begin to erode that ground floor as well, push it back even farther. But you can see what that begins to do in terms of offering at least a bit more pleasant experience walking down that sidewalk. This goes back to a lot of the imagery that we all explored together early on in this process. I think it was overwhelming. We want the wider sidewalks with outdoor programming, street trees, and what is that sort of sweet spot, if you will, in terms of the sidewalk width. If we look at what might happen if the opposite side of Old Statesville Road redeveloped based upon the plan there. Same scale of building, plus or minus. Keeping this existing sidewalk at about 8 feet, you begin to see how compressed that begins to feel. And is that really enough sidewalk area that would accommodate the sorts of activities I think we've been talking about? Should that have a setback similar to the west side of Old Statesville Road to give you not only a sort of a consistent, perhaps uniform sidewalk vocabulary, but give you the opportunity for a more extensive street programming presence along that street. Another variation is the arcade. This is it's a west-facing, perhaps southwest-facing facade. Is there an opportunity to extend out from that building face an arcade to give you that other layer of protection or that feeling of comfort? Because again, in this scenario here, you got vehicles that are moving through, and I know everybody's talked about the speeds of those vehicles coming through. That conflict between the activities along these edges and the speed and movement of traffic in the street. Another, sort of more radical approach, perhaps to introduce or reintroduce some on-street parking. Again, setting the building back, reclaiming some of that area for an 8-foot layer of parking, which perhaps gives you, again, that implied safety cushion, as well as roadway friction along that portion. You can see as it gets closer to the intersection of Gilead and or Huntersville Concord Road, with the bulb out there, there's an opportunity to introduce some, again, landscaping, some stormwater infiltration devices and things of that nature. As we look at that VUNERF, this is now, we're in the south side where we just crossed over Huntersville Concord Road. We're looking at this cross-section here through existing Main Street commercial buildings and what that edge of the parking structure might be if it were to be lined with some buildings. Again, when we look at the backs of the Main Street buildings, that's, again, one of the hidden gems within downtown Huntersville as part of the soul, just some of the activities, the outdoor programming, and the patio experiences that are individual with each one of these particular properties. We would encourage to embrace that and really showcase that as part of this VUNERF experience here. And again, we're trying to show this, and give share the intent that it is really sort of a street that is pedestrian forward, but is friendly to the cars. So again, on any, if there's an event day or special occasions, perhaps segments of the street can be closed and becomes a full pedestrian-only street. We wanted to share some of the flexibility that might be possible with the addition of removable bollards and perhaps other improvements along this edge here. This is another view of that same corridor to give you a sense of that experience. Again, we're just showing some potential programming ideas. Is there a fire pit? Is there an opportunity for musicians? Just some community things that can happen on a recurring basis that really give this VUNERF unique experience. Compared to perhaps some other retail experiences that are happening along Huntersville-Concord Road. As we come farther south, this is where, it begins to transform into more of a residential or, sort of calmer experience here. This is the existing, line of 3 historic homes. This is the first one here as we're tracking south. Is there an opportunity to showcase and protect and enhance that lawn edge there with the new Wohnert to get an intentional streetscape? Again, you can see the sort of spill out of on-street parking, and some landscaping, so there's that sort of blurring that takes place where you feel comfortable walking down the street, and the cars are respecting the pedestrians. On the right side, if you begin to imagine, this is the redevelopment of the town's surface parking area there. Is there an opportunity for a two-sided building that could have frontage on Main Street, but also on to Maxwell Avenue with an enhanced outdoor sidewalk area, as well as a very sensitive on-street parking and bio retention approach. So again, we look at this segment of Maxwell Avenue from Huntersville-Concord Road to the south there. It's really an amazing amenity to downtown Huntersville. Here's just another vignette of that. As we come across to Main Street, what you see here is a cross-section of Main Street through the Norfolk Southern Corridor and then South Church Street and the combined seam trail. So you can see, this is representing the current design that's under construction right now for the Main Street. So you have a through traffic turning lane to the north to get onto Huntersville-Concord Road, and the through lane to continue on Main Street. You can see it leaves about an 8-foot wide sidewalk, which begins to taper and expand as we get farther south, but just want to give an idea of what that begins to look like. About a 50-foot corridor, and then we're showing, again, the opportunity for that Wohnert to take place on South Church Street. It could be just a standard street, but this is just an idea of how you might begin to co-locate the seam trail as part of that street experience. You can see that, we're respecting those existing trees that are on the corner there, setting buildings back to allow for those to be preserved, and let that become an opportunity for some wonderful smaller pocket park spaces. Here's a focus sort of view of the Main Street there, so you begin to see what's happening there from a cross-section standpoint. And again, this is something from a streetscape standpoint that will be very important to sort of take to that next level of design, beyond this process here, to make that as pedestrian-friendly as possible. As we come to the Southeast Quadrant, what's really exciting about this is the town's capital improvement project. They have indicated the extension of South Church Street. It would sort of deviate from its current pathway to allow for an alignment with Walter Street at this intersection we talked about before. So we sort of, and you see that in the composite plan there, in this alignment. As we go through this planning process and we look at building footprints, block configurations, and other opportunities, begin to suggest to us that perhaps instead of this sort of sweeping curve approach, perhaps there's an opportunity to create a smaller intersection. It does give primacy with a roundabout to the South Church Street extension, but then gives you the ability for some more rectilinear blocks that can accommodate a variety of different building footprints that preserve, some of the existing buildings that are there in place right now, but also preserve and embrace and feature some of the landscape features. The other thing that's interesting and quite possible here is to introduce a parallel greenway that sort of starts at this pinch location at the intersection of Huntersville-Concord Road, begins to expand and set back, 50, 75 feet from the street to give, again, a more lush frontage to these building locations, as well as additional pathways that deviate and decouple from the South Church Street extension. A couple of key things in this area here in terms of projects. Again, we're showing building footprints here where the White Hill senior housing apartments are. Is there an opportunity to work together with them to sort of reimagine their program in a different manner that perhaps combines the Hunter Village Assisted Living Facility? Not quite sure what the ages of those are, but there's a lot of new concepts that are out there where they are sort of commingled and closer to the activities that take place in a downtown environment. And in doing so, is there an opportunity to reclaim that space for another regional stormwater component? From a topography standpoint, this is a low point. You can see it's sort of the headwaters of the stream. Is there the ability to create that larger, perhaps, if not, a smaller stormwater facility, but it really becomes an extension of this Greenway. The important thing about that is that it allows for connections, and it really ties to the Seam Trail. So it allows for the continuation of that experience on and off the trail. To the south here, you can see this is another neighborhood sort of enclave, but this is really an opportunity to provide that transitional housing from the existing neighborhood. It's an inviting entrance and connection to the Pottstown neighborhood to the south. Align the street with Bauckham Lane, allowing that continuation of sidewalks and bicycle ways and just pedestrian activity along the street and into the downtown. And the nuance in this block, I was trying to show that there is the opportunity for a larger footprint on the corner, if appropriate for a smaller market or another retail use that would need a larger footprint. Again, we're trying to share with you that there is the ability with these block configurations for multiple expressions. And here's a vignette looking at this cross-section here. Again, pulling back for a pocket park to include those existing trees, showing the outdoor activity that might spill out from the ground floor, and how that might become part of that new South Church Street and combined Seam Trail experience. Here's a vignette looking at the extension of Church Street, where perhaps you do have that regional facility that is amenitized, and you begin to see the opportunities to create smaller areas for folks to enjoy and provide those connections across the street into the housing edge there. Here's a couple of views looking both ways. And this one here, this is where we're talking before, is there the opportunity to expand that Greenway, 50 feet or so to embrace those existing trees and create that sort of frontage along the street edge. That's another view there. I'll leave it there for any questions.
This Seam Trail is just kind of like, does it have its own width, or is it a lane, or is it just something that is the connector, kind of like a Greenway? Like when it gets to a Woolnorth, is it just part of the Woolnorth, or is it, how does that work?
It could be, yes. I mean, there would be on, go back to,
Carolina's Seam Trail is, and then built it. Yes.
the Seam Trail is, one segment through, Huntersville, as part of a larger trail system that Parks, is looking at. And as it comes, it tracks along the existing rail corridor. And it's been envisioned to sort of parallel Church Street through, Huntersville. As we know, Church Street is really pressed up against the corridor, railroad corridor on one side, so there's very limited opportunity to do anything on that edge. So the real opportunity is on the other side, where there are some existing sidewalks. So what you see here in this instance is we would certainly have sidewalks along any buildings along that edge. So the idea would be that that would be a continuation or shared as part of that scene trail experience. There might be some unique identifiers so that you know you're still on the scene trail. There might be some street lights or some other amenities or elements to say, okay, yes, I'm still on the scene trail. But the idea when you get to this area here, if this is a Wiener, you feel comfortable walking in the street or going off the street, depending on what's happening there. So we really see, this as sort of the scene trail, Church Street, Wiener, is really that whole width. Obviously, if there's a car coming, you're going to move to the side, or they're going to respect you. But in every instance, it would not be, you're competing with the car 100%. So there'd always be that parallel sidewalk. But the idea is, if you were a bicyclist going on the scene trail, you would feel very comfortable, biking along that. It's part of the scene
I
trail.
have to share a little bit. We have a lot of a couple of observations I would ask. A couple of observations that have everyone think about that since we last met that I've had experience to go two different places, very, very different. One being, I was speaking at a conference in July, I guess it was, over in Germany. So I had a chance to go back, my wife and I, to visit ancestral homes. My ancestors from Heidelberg, her ancestors from a place called Erfurt, which is on the old East Germany side. Both old medieval cities are well preserved, but also they have taken everything we're talking about today. They started implementing about 15, 20 years ago. And I went even through a great Wohnhof in Erfurt. It's half full of citizens, half full of tourists, some of which are Americans, and they don't know what's going on hardly. But you had light rail running through there. You had cyclists, and yes, they have those dreaded scooters like are all over Charlotte these days, soon coming to a street near you, probably. Pedestrians of all manner and stripes, with people pushing buggies with babies. It worked like a choreographed dance. I must have spent like 2 hours in that walking, but also made sure I got in my rental car and drove that thing a few times to notice my own behavior. And when you're in that space, you behave quite differently than you do if you're on a typical American street in a blacktop with the lanes marked out clearly and all the signs barking at you what to do. Somehow, humanity takes over when you're in that space. And people act differently. Even back in the day, like I mentioned once before, even back in the day on Birkdale Village, I had all kinds of friends and developer clients say, Shook, you're going to kill people. There won't be a person left in northern Mecklenburg in 5 years. I said, I don't think so. I think human beings are much smarter than that. No, you're not. You're going to, well, I guess time speaks for itself. The other place I visited, which I want you, and perhaps many of you have been here, any equestrians around the table? Ever been to Camden, South Carolina? If not, go. Camden is a place that has streets, and it also has multiple alleyways that have turned into great things in terms of, like we have talked about in Wooners here. It's a place where, life can be discovered in a very pedestrian-friendly way, and the aggregate of that creates soul, in Camden, for Camden. And they get a lot of international, because of the equestrian world, they get people from all over the country. It's just almost the inverse in many ways of what the European cities are, like Erfurt. But they have the internationals that come there for polo and what have you, and they don't know what they're doing. But they enjoy it. Just a couple of things to think about. And the only reason I mentioned that, I don't want to interrupt the questioning, but I know we'll probably have a lot of questions about this because there's a lot here to absorb, is that this is basically a system of networks of decisions that can be made to establish an infrastructure, and the buildings that can come can be, I know there'll be a lot of probably questions about scale and height, because we have shown buildings, some that are, I guess, 3/1 layer. We don't have any 4/1s, did we? I think 3/1s is the most. 3/1s and 2/1s, and some of them are basically two-story, multifamily buildings. As a professional, for me, if the scale is good within that range, arguing whether or not two-story is better than three or three is better than four is like arguing about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. I mean, because both of it creates and delivers great urbanism. But I just wanted to share that. I mean, and that's true up and down that scale. If somebody does have a reason that they think, we want to talk about it, that shouldn't be a three-story expression. That should be a two or the other way around. So this is the first cut of trying to find a way to integrate all these things we're talking about in the 3D. And the discussions after I shut up will help to inform the other decisions and things we'll bring before you in the next weeks.
Are there other questions at the table? Yes,
What do you foresee for Gilead Road?
can't hear you.
I know, what do you foresee for Gilead Road? Because right now, it's supposed to be widened, and that is, kind of insane.
They're supposed to summarize that next. We'll hold them to it.
Good.
Okay, yes.
Hey, I just want to make a comment about the steam trail, just one additional comment. That is a trail that Mecklenburg County is managing the development of. They're coordinating with towns and also northern counties and planning to develop it from the border of South Carolina all the way up to Statesville. Huntersville is the midpoint. Exciting. So.
Fine.
I thought it was a red line trail. Is it now, what's the seam trail?
Okay, it used to be called the Mooresville to Charlotte Trail at one time.
And
Now
now-
they've renamed that to the seam and they've extended it from the border of North Carolina, South Carolina, all the way up to Statesville.
There's a thread that goes east-west.
I know, but it was called the red line on plans that I submitted to the town.
The Red Trail is an additional trail. That's separate.
Any other questions? Comments?
I'll throw one out there. So there's a lot of, I guess there's a lot of residential right on 3,000 miles. That's great. But what I see is we're just going to be east side, west side because we're going to wind up with only 3 crossings to the railway, right? It's 4th Street. We're going to have Huntersville Concord Road, and we're going to have Gibson Park, and that's going to be about it. So how do we offer something else? Do we go over it, or how do we energize our roads? Because I want to go over there, I've got to walk a quarter mile that way. And that. What's the answer to that?
Well, it's a great question. And, that east-west connector, that was one potential link that we were sort of, pursuing. We still like to keep that on the table. Whether it's at grade or under, those are probably the 2 considerations there. You're not going to go over. It's just too much of a jump.
Right.
It's just not feasible. But that's the reality. And with that, it's going to require some other closures, as you know, up and down the corridor in Huntersville, sort of trade-off. But is a good trade-off to provide more connectivity to east and west, to your point?
It's a very good question.
It's walkability, like it's not the cars, right? That's what I'm talking about.
It's a very good question, and I think, as we went back and talked about, the organizing principles, you're going to find us coming back to that as we get near the end. We started with that, and we'll end with it. Not this presentation, but our whole work. Is that it's all about the town expressing their intentionality of what they want to see. A lot of these questions, just as you've reported on the recent discussions at NCDOT, a lot of policy and decisions have been made there relative to that, which we're not prepared to do tonight because I think it's a broader topic. But that involves, just as that discussion involves Norfolk Southern, so does the issue you're talking about. All of these things come back. I hate to say it, and it's like trench warfare. You have to have resolve. You have to tell all public bodies and private citizens, this is what we're about to do. And within the framework that you define for yourself out of this process, you let that direct your discussions with people who are not at this table or at this dais, but are outside, so they understand where you want to go and what the town's intentions are. It's as simple and as complicated as that. But it starts, I think, with this plan.
John emailed out, and I briefly looked at it about where federal dollars are going to be involved, and eliminating railroad crossings is one and includes mobility. So going under 4th Street would seem like that might hit several buttons to not have another crossing and to go under there. And I think there is decent grade to make that happen. So that might be something we put in here, because if you can get some federal money out of it, everybody's gonna get their share of the pie. So, thanks, Sean.
Yeah, there's a ton of money out there. If you guys got a chance to look at that email, there's a lot specifically dedicated to municipalities right now from the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. So a lot of what we can do here is super feasible with those dollars that are out there. So I kind of think that from a sustainability aspect, you know, we can kind of think big because it's accessible. You know, and we have the money. It's our tax dollars that we're paying for. We might as well, as a community, take advantage of it.
And Fourth Street's a good opportunity.
Fourth Street's a great
Because it
opportunity.
involves railroad.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to, they want to eliminate crossings.
Right. That was in that.
And
You said they want less of it.
Well, the tag on that, I thought maybe one of the first questions that came out of tonight that would have superseded anything about the vision plan was, well, what about that $5 million study that MTC is looking at relative to the line? First off, I know nothing about it. Came out of the blue. But I tell you, I said, it gives me encouragement in terms of like this discussion, if nothing else, that that some discussion somewhere is going on where an iceberg may have cracked. I'm going to hold that out. I'll say it publicly. I have no reason of knowing. I know a lot of the issues behind it that are bigger than that line that are driving it. So it involves discussions on bigger lines than this. But I'm going to be hopeful. I just want to say that. I'm going to be hopeful.
Well, seeing the suspicious person I bet it goes to the airport, Rock Hill, Gastonia, and there's not enough traffic there.
That was
So I actually I had to give an interview about this last week, and they're supposedly Norfolk Southern is going to release a statement at the beginning of next week. What that statement implies, I have no idea, but look out for it. It's supposed to be next Monday.
Jones, you got a question?
I have a few statements. I couldn't help but write down, Larry, a few moments ago, when one of your first statements was in the first quadrant, or the second quadrant, was preserve tree canopy as you come into town on Old Statesville. Forgive me. Main Street took that down. Number two, Huntersville Methodist Church to us folks over 60 is not vacant. It is occupied quite a bit on Sundays. So I have no problem with what you said about church, but it is occupied. And Terry, I'll go back to 25 years ago when you and Peter Pappas and several others in here, and Peter had enough nerve to call me Charlie, and I told him you didn't want Mother to show up. The reason, from my perspective, that one of the main reasons that Burkdale works is there's on-street parking. There's more on-street parking in that development than there is in all the rest of Huntersville. It's on both sides of the street. You can't go fast in that development. It encourages walking.
And I would
By
not.
the way, Main Street took it away, didn't it, Sean?
And I would not argue with what you just said at any level. I'm a great proponent of on-street parking. And it is still a work in progress in terms of what we're doing in this plan as we even narrow down. But it also involves those ongoing discussions. Dave, if you wish to chime in with NCDOT, I don't want to get over my skis in any way, because that is an ongoing discussion. That one I will not be future casting. But I am hopeful through all this process that on-street parking will be in that. One of the other things I want to point out, and is there a way, is this pointer work on this thing at all? Is it that kind of,
No, you gotta point to this.
is it technological whiz here? Top button. One of the things that as you'll see coming out of this about Own Street is that picking where one can fight battles and picking where you can create it. You know, most of that Own Street parking that works at Burkdale is where retail, focus centered places are, right? I mean, they're symbiotic. Our hope is, as we look at this, as we go forward and And, oh, excuse me, sorry, right here, wrong one, that's wrong side of the street, my dyslexia kicked in. But as we look at these blocks, because even the diagrams we see from NCDOT, they don't much care what happens from here to here. Oh, they do some, but you've seen their diagrams. And we've got it at the end of the show, in fact. So our hope as we drill down into this, there's going to be a number of on-street parkings that work throughout this whole plan that feeds into it. On-street parking, given the way we put it, is not necessarily, what takes place here and here. If we can create other opportunities for the consumer, for the customer, like Burkdale, like we don't have any on-street parking out at 73, it's about creating an urban environment where on-street parking works with as much of the retail as possible.
Well, I'll give you for instance. So they took away my on-street parking a month and a half ago, 2 months ago.
It's getting ready to get worse.
We've dropped 30% in revenue. So just to give you an idea of the ramifications and the positives that on-street parking gives, 30% is a lot.
Oh, you heard Bob talk about one on-street parking space is worth somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000 of annual retail sales.
So when
That's what it's
when
worth.
we are talking about this, it's imperative for us to really examine it, because the economic impact, I'm one of the only businesses that are on Main Street. There's only a few of us that are there, and the impact that it has is incredible. And I don't think people really understand that the ramifications of that economics go all over downtown, and I think it really needs to get examined, because, and I know I bug people with this, but it's not just me, it's everybody else too. It's accessibility for people. It's for people to pull up, grab a cup of coffee, and leave in 5 minutes. That commerce that goes is incredibly impactful to our community, and I think it needs to be extremely thought out. And I know the planning department has a lot of hiccups because DOT approved a plan, and you got to stick to it to get the money, right? I get it, totally. But for future plans, I think it needs to be incorporated, not only on Main Street, but other streets around town that have facing commerce.
Exactly, and that's exactly my point, is that, again, as planners, we're always, you've heard me say it before, we're focused on the fourth dimension called time. And I don't have a time turner to go back, and if I could, I would, to fix some of those past decisions in the past that led to the very situation you live with today. But I can tell you, the focus of this plan, it'll be at the next levels, we'll be showing it, with the kind of planning we do. That's the reason we're looking for this tight grid. We're looking for these opportunities so as Huntersville grows and evolves, and yes, changes some, that linkage between on-street parking and commerce is as tight as it can be, and is set up in such a way where it's not either a target of or a victim of policy planning from transportation. That's the best we can tell you. That's a focus of ours. We believe it. We said it from the very beginning, and we're looking at it through the creation of this diagram, this network you see of places.
I can go on.
Go ahead.
I promise. This is more for the planning department to Brian stood up. All these ideas, they're great and everything, but most of them are on private property. So we're trying to figure out how do we set the table for whoever comes in here to see the same vision. So if you're knitting pieces of lots together, you go into the subdivision ordinance and you're supposed to abide by that. I think if it's a conditional build, then you can put so much conditions on that. But things like we're trying to save the trees along the street. Well, they're on private property.
Sure.
Right? And if a developer comes in and buys 3 or 4 of these lots on 115 and decides that these are my trees and I'm going to mow them down and I'll pay the fine or whatever, how do we really affect saving those trees? The other thing is the mention of easements and alleyways and things like that. We get our checkbook out, we buy all these right of ways to make sure we have the proper setback, set the building back 20 feet from Gideon Road or from Old Statesville, things like that. Or how much meat can we put on our ordinances to make sure the vision happens, I guess is the question.
As long as it's not illegal, we can write the laws. I mean, you can mandate a setback, you can mandate tree save, you can mandate different things. You can make, right now, currently, we have a minimum 2-story building height. You can up that to 3 on certain blocks. This is where, we do this plan, then the suggestions come out of it, and then we go and amend our ordinances to, allow these things that are envisioned to come to fruition.
So, other than building height, you would agree we have a lot of work to do on our ordinances in order to.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we could have a downtown overlay district. There could be, go ahead.
So they would probably have mind as action items.
Exactly.
And I think it's perfect to be thinking in terms of, looking at what some of the design recommendations are in terms, and also the layout recommendations from Larry and Terry. But looking forward toward implementation, I think you have to use several tools out of the toolbox. Certainly, one of the things you can do, and I've seen it done in many places, is you can have a special downtown district. So it contains zoning regulations or other urban design regulations that are not found elsewhere in the town of Huntersville. So it allows you to be very surgical and do things very specifically. So you can do things, the minute I saw some of the renderings, I thought in terms of, are people catching on the idea of, can we require balconies? Do we require some kind of outdoor space where you have interaction between pedestrians and the activity going on inside the establishment? So there's a lot of things you can do, but the other thing I will tell you is that regulations only get you so far. And my experience is that if you start to look at the town having a role in economic development, then you can start saying, okay, it may not be in the regulations, but if you want us to participate financially, you're going to participate in this WUNRF, or you're going to do some things that may not be required by the regulations, but it is in our plan, and if you want the money, or if you want us to, pardon me, if you want us to participate financially, we want you to go over and above what those regulations state, because this is what we want our downtown to look like.
One thing I could add on to that about that, and the other part of it has to do, again, with community will, and this is the beauty of being an elder citizen. As Charles said, the reality was back when Burkdale was done, the town did one of the first ever form-based codes, as light as it was, in the United States. Okay, so a developer came in, Forest City Enterprises came in and did the greens of Burkdale in the back. And then Forest City, the retail crowd came in, Charles, and said, no, we don't want to do that thing you have here. We want to do a strip center. And this town council, I don't know if they were sitting here, they were sitting in a dais somewhere, right here, said, no, thank you very much. Our ordinance is very real. And it's that point in time that Forest City said, oh, you are real, and they sold it to people who would do and match up with the town's expectations. So it's all about, we can have all these rules, but you got to have it so it's continual, and the citizens support it and make sure and hold their electeds, to the fire.
John, then go ahead.
All I want to say is I think it's going to start with the town board after this plan's adopted. And if the town board wants to see some action, if you look at something just like Whitehall or Hunter House, I mean, that's going to take staff, somebody appointed who's going to be working on the redevelopment of the downtown, probably full-time, and working with the owners of Whitehall and probably 10 other projects, because you're only going to maybe get one done a year. I mean, I'm open on my land to discussing anything with the town, but there are any number of landowners that are going to be resistant. So it is going to take the town council. It's a waste of time to do it unless the town council says, I like this plan. Here's the first 10 areas I want you to work on, and I'm going to hire you to do it, and you go out and talk to the people and try to get them together. And I'm in favor of arcades, by the way.
Okay, so is it time now to move into Gilead Road considerations?
Madam Chair, can I ask one more question?
You may.
I apologize for taking the time of the committee. I think one thing that from staff and consultant perspective, and maybe
Larry, you can help with this. As we move toward November, our next meeting, what kind of input would be the most helpful as you start to refine these plans?
When is our next meeting first?
November 3rd.
November 3rd?
Between there, we'll talk about item number 2, there's a public forum on the 20th of October. So we're going to continue to build upon things you've seen tonight, share that with the community, and have some
It
interaction.
said November 3rd. I thought there was one on.
Okay, thanks. All right.
Oh, I missed it. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, what would help, I mean, if there's any feedback, and I don't have the mechanism in mind right now, that if you'd like to share with us based upon, because again, as we said, there's a lot of information to absorb. Apologize we didn't get these plans out, a lot of considerations. If you can begin to look at and let us know if there's anything that you see that perhaps is out of sync with the organizing principles. You know, those are 6 key components there. We tried obviously to keep that in mind as we went through here. Anything that's out of sync, anything that we've missed, or anything that just seems, you know, just really not in keeping with downtown Huntersville. But in terms of the mechanism for doing that, I guess I need to talk more with Dave and Terry. What is the best way? Is it an email, or is there what is that vehicle?
I guess just operationally, unless Sarah and Lee want to do it differently, from a staff perspective, if you send any questions or comments to Tracy and myself, I think what we can do is maybe organize them a little bit. And I think it's important, we said as part of our consistent communication strategy, once we get them all, we'll share them with the entire group so you know what kind of questions and comments have been offered.
One thing I want to add to that too is that Larry said, because we all know I'm sounding right now like the 5th stanza of Handel's Messiah, but we did those organizing principles for a reason. That really is an analytical tool. So please keep those kind of with you when you review this and hold us accountable. Say, look, we said this, where is this here? So we are consciously doing that when we plan, I'll tell you. And that's the evaluation tool we would love for everyone to use as you go through.
I have a question. I thought we meet next on October the 20th. I'm so confused.
I'm sorry, the next committee meeting is November 3rd. The public forum will be at the church, at the Huntersville Presbyterian Church on October 20th at 6 o'clock.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Is that going to be pretty much what we saw just now?
I think Larry's going to go over the last item, will be the format for the public forum. So we can talk about it in just a minute.
I just want to, I guess, share some initial considerations here. As I know Dave and Jack shared over the past couple of meetings, the DOT project for Gilead Road, we've learned with our meeting together with them earlier in September that it is moving forward based upon the restoration of funding. And what they shared was this drawing that you're looking at now. And again, as Dave and Jack mentioned, this is a draft. This is sort of where they put pencils down before they sort of suspended the project. But it does represent sort of their intent in terms of the design, striving toward a level of service for the intersection of Gilead Road and Old Statesville Road. You can see it's represented by the lanes you see there before you. That being said, you know, obviously there's some considerations. This is funded under their current STIP, and I apologize, I'm going to speak out of my hat. I'm not a traffic engineer, but our engineers are there together with the DOT folks. Under the current STIP, they are going to advance design using this, I assume, as a basis. Now, there's an opportunity for the town to collaborate with them as they advance design to look for possible potential design modifications. Because we know that this design right now does not function, does not give them the level of service they need. So the question becomes, what sorts of modifications can be done that brings this design into harmony with what the town wants. Is that even possible? And our initial understanding is it may not be possible given their approach right now. Because again, they're trying to connect from the Interchange 21 project to the Main Street project, and they're looking at providing that level of service, and their level of service criteria is a threshold D. So in order to achieve that D with those sort of parameters in place, you know, it's hard for us to imagine what they would do dramatically different from what we're looking at right now. In fact, it might be something a little bit more aggressive. Again, I'm speculating. So what does that mean? What are some of the potential pathways? You know, continue working together with DOT in the hopes that they can be modified in a manner that does comport with some of the visions, the organizing principles that we have, and the plans that we're generating, and maintain and keep that funding. Another pathway is to decline this project now and rescope it based upon a whole another set of parameters. What are other modifications or other elements within the town network that can be looked at that would perhaps augment and result in a different design that perhaps is in more harmony with what the downtown envisions for Gilead Road. The risk on that is that you're forfeiting the funding for that. And you're going through this rescoring process, which would have to be sort of weighed against a new regional forecast, a different cost, and where does that begin to rank in their prioritization in terms of actually achieving funding to make it happen. Another option is to decline the project and do nothing. Another one, sort of a subset of that, is you know, the town takes over from NCDOT, takes over this segment. Now, the one thing that was clear during the meeting with DOT is, you know, that is a possibility, but there would have to be some assurances, some conditions put in place. As you might imagine, this is a unique segment of state road, and they are going to want protections to their projects that are happening with, you know, the interchange with Main Street. We don't know what that is. It's, again, this is sort of real-time information. Yes, sir.
Has anybody talked about squeezing a roundabout? Cut two more.
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, those seem to be a solution for heavy traffic. And, you know, if we're moving some buildings around, and, I mean, I'd rather see a roundabout there. We're gonna have two on either end and two there, and
Yeah,
I'm taking the new roundabout instead of going down and turning left over the railroad tracks.
sure.
Because it works.
Yeah, our transportation planner has reached out to a roundabout expert who is going to take a look at this for us and see if it is a possibility.
Excellent.
One of the things that did come through that, to tag on that last thing Larry said, in terms of, going the route of taking over responsibility for those segments, it was clear to me in our discussions that NCDOT representatives were very aware that even though Huntersville, right now, given the way the roads are alignment, you are the recipient of regional traffic, that the road, that all the traffic in many ways is of a regional basis. It will only increase with time, and then therefore the options for relieving that are more than this. So when we ended the conversation really with that, if there's other ways to do that, it would, if you wanted to take it over, there'd have to be mitigation strategies that would be more regional, that would require much more study, and it was unclear as to who would be doing that. But they didn't, I found that they were very informed and open to that much bigger idea. And that's all I could say about that.
Any other questions, comments?
I was going to make one final comment. We do know that Matthews and Stallings are in the same situation, and Matthews apparently has more or less said, we don't want your money. We don't want to change the character so drastically that we just become a pass-through. And what happens then is I think that they go back, they look at what the objectives are for their downtown, and they actually enter into competition into a different funding pot. I don't know if it's called urban enhancement or something like that, but there's a risk involved. Obviously, you have, a bird in the hand. I think this boils down to the community just having to say, are we going to stick with, or what is it we really want Gilead to be, and what do we want that intersection out the front door? What do we want Huntersville to look like? This is going to be basically the core intersection of the town, or the downtown. Do you want to stick with your guns, or do you want to jump for the money when the money's hot?
Well, I encourage everyone to think about that long and hard and to send your comments to Dave of the weekend, and so we can combine them, because I plan on sending mine. I really do. I'm not going to say it out loud. I'm going to be nice. Any other comments? Dave, follow up? Next steps?
We're going to talk about the public forum.
Oh, public forum, go right ahead.
I'll be brief. I just want to kind of give an outline of how we're going to approach this public forum. To answer your question, we are going to build upon these exhibits we shared tonight. We're going to refine them. We're going to take in the feedback that we get between now and then from the committee here. And the intent is that we're going to give an introduction, an overview in terms of the project schedule, help them, the community understand what we went up to, remind them of the organizing principles, and where we are with the draft composite plan, which is really sort of that underlying framework for the master plan. And we'll go through kind of an overview of each of the quadrants. But the idea is that we hopefully get everybody onto the tables, and what we've organized is 4 groupings of tables, so we can focus on each of the 4 quadrants. We'll have enlarged plans there on the table, as well as the opportunity to have some public input on each one of those areas. We'll have folks at each one of those stations to talk about and answer any questions that might evolve. Along one area there, we'll have some base maps. Again, some of the earlier plans and just initial base information. So if anybody wants to reference, we'll have that available as well.
Just a comment.
Yes.
Can we get a microphone for him at the public forum
We've
this
got,
time?
we've had that text.
I figured so, thank you.
And the presentation is going to be this, and the tables, right? It's going to be.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Are we going to do the technology voting thing again, or are we going to let that?
I would love to get feedback that way. I know that creates some complications. If we do that, and I'm just going to work with our tech department, we're not going to have the clickers and the phone. It would be just the phone. So everybody's uniform, and there's no sort of issues or glitches, as minimal as possible. And the idea would be that we would ask certain questions or just kind of get a preference on certain aspects within each one of the quadrants. And keep it just sort of very high level, general sort of, what is your, for instance, what are your feelings about the church extension Greenway? Positive, negative, strongly, or less so. But that would be sort of the concluding component there, just to kind of get some of that direct feedback that we can organize. But obviously, we'll treat it similarly on the tables there. There'll be Post-its where people can write comments, and we'll certainly be there to answer any questions that might come up. We will have hard copy handouts of the plan for the community to have throughout the entire presentation and to walk away with it at the end of the day. Yes, ma'am.
Phone app. This is each person that comes to the forum will download an app to be able to give their feedback?
Yes, there's there'll be a QR code where they can just kind of scan it off the screen, and that'll immediately link them to, the questions that we go through.
So for their phones,
Yes.
you don't have a phone.
I was waiting on you, I was waiting on you, Miss Holly.
That's, well, we're still talking through that.
I've got parking. I don't
Yep.
need phones.
An alternative might be that we have,
Okay,
hard copies.
Suggestion box?
Yeah.
Right, I was like,
Stick it in.
do we have anything less technology?
any other questions?
Yes, ma'am.
All right,
I purposely left the room to keep from creating my own hurricane on my thoughts, but I am gonna remain steadfast that probably the most disturbing thing that I've seen in these meetings was when Mr. Dave pulled up that map about 2 meetings ago with that 17-lane freeway out here called Gilead Road from 21 to 115. And I don't think that I was the only one in this room that inhaled for about 30 minutes. I will go back in history a tad. I would vow, swear, and declare that 2/3 of the reason for this $30 million project out here called Main Street, called two-way pair, called whatever somebody wanted to call it for the moment, was to alleviate this problem out here. And I know that I'm not wrong about that. So it's quite funny that we spent $30 million and now the NCDOT from the other end of this world wants to turn around and then cram a 6-lane highway, a 4-lane highway, a 3-lane highway, and I don't know what they're gonna do between here and yonder. It incenses me that they don't care about our downtown, never have, never will. We have to do the same thing here that I was encouraged to do 22 years ago that Terry talked about. I didn't say I liked Burkdale, but what Burkdale did is what Burkdale did, and it worked for them. I don't dislike it, don't misquote me, somebody. We've got to stand up for what we want to happen down here, and if y'all don't want that 6-lane road, it can't be 3 or 4 of us, and I didn't say it's only 3 or 4, but that has to be a virtual unanimous landslide voice from this group to the town board, to the staff, or it will, no telling what they'll do.
Signs.
any other? Then write your pieces in, your comments in, we're gonna vote on it. We're gonna call for a vote on it.
All right.
And whenever voting time comes. Okay? Any other comments? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, all discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, none, motion carries adjourned.
Because it is so close from here to